Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast, your guide to optimizing your life one health tip at a time. This podcast is designed to entertain and inform, not to provide medical or health advice. Always consult your doctor when it comes to your personal health or before you make any changes to your diet, exercise, or lifestyle.
Ladies and gentlemen, peak performance requires peak ATP synthesis. And how do we do that? Methylene Blue, and that's why we're talking about that today. Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle here with Dr. K.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us as we discuss Methylene Blue. You probably heard about it at this point. If you're watching our podcast, either you've seen an old episode about it or you've heard about it from somewhere else because it's becoming all the rage. What's funny is it was invented in like 1890.
So it's all the rage now with like biohackers and cutting edge health people, but It's been around for almost 150 years?
Something like that. Yeah, basically it started as a textile dye, and then they realized it actually helps psychiatric patients, and then they realized it was antipathogenic, and then it went away for a long time, and then it came back and they realized, wait, it's actually anti-aging, it's serotonin stimulating, it's, what else is it? Mitochondrial stimulating.
Yeah. So the way we're going to frame this, and so you guys know what we're doing, because we already have an episode on Methylene Blue.
Yep.
We're going to walk back through our previous episodes and try to hit the same topics, but at a ultra simplified level, because we realize that we get in the weeds too much sometimes.
So like, if you want like super in-depth, go listen to season 1. If you want like the super basic overview, listen to this episode and the following episodes.
So we talked a little bit about the history of Methylene Blue, but we're going to dive into 3 main things it does.
Yep.
Number 1 is antibacterial, antipathogenic.
Yep. So antipathogenic means kills bacteria, viruses, molds, parasites, fungi, and everything else in between.
So basically, it goes in, and all that bad stuff in your body does not like Methylene Blue, and it just helps kill it.
Yep. So it used to be like the original UTI treatment before America as a culture said, we don't want IVs, we want pills. And then switched to antibiotics. But Methylene Blue is a great UTI treatment for chronic resistant UTIs.
Yep. And also, we've seen a lot of success with prostate.
Yep.
So people who have random infections that don't quite know what they are, maybe elevated PSA, things like that, Methylene Blue can help there. So it can really help with any infection to some degree.
Yep. Now, the caveat on that is your intestines and your stomach are full of bacteria.
Yeah. So if you are megadosing oral Methylene Blue, it could have the potential to clear out too much of the bacteria there,
so
leading to dysbiosis, things like that.
What's dysbiosis?
Bad gut.
There you go. We're going to try and keep it very simple.
Yeah. So that's effect number 1. Effect number 2 is basically it stimulates serotonin. So there's a spot in your brain called the blue spot, and the way Methylene Blue works is it helps.
The blue stuff hits the blue spot?
Yep, essentially. That's what happens. Blue stuff hits the blue spot and gives you more of the feel-good hormone, serotonin.
Yep.
You probably know the word serotonin from SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which is just a fancy way of saying antidepressant, anti-anxiety meds.
Yep.
So it makes you feel good, happy, loved.
Could you take Methylene Blue instead of your antidepressants?
I would not recommend doing that. Please work with your doctor. Don't switch. Do not stop your antidepressants or your medication.
Yep.
However, if you are considering going on SSRIs, you might want to try Methylene Blue first.
Yep. Also, do not take antidepressants with Methylene Blue because you can get what's called serotonin syndrome, which is very dangerous.
Yes. So be very careful about psychiatric medicines and Methylene Blue at the same time.
Also, microdosing or full dosing psilocybin.
Yes, any doses of things that work in serotonin pathways. So that would be MDMA, psilocybin, LSD.
So don't do drugs and biohacking drugs. Separate your drugs by at least a day.
Very important we say that because it's dangerous. So, but basically, the easiest way I explain it, the second benefit of serotonin, I feel good and loving and kind when I'm taking Methylene Blue. I think that's the simplest way I can put it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So benefit number 3 of Methylene Blue is ATP synthesis.
Yep.
fancy words. ATP is what makes our energy. If you go back to high school, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Well, it makes ATP. It's kind of like the fuel for your body. And so Methylene Blue, a lifestyle or optimization of your body is all about mitochondria making them perform more effectively through a thing called the Krebs cycle. That's just the name for the cycle of mitochondria it runs through. And you can uptake it at different parts. Oxygen uptakes it, NAD uptakes it, NMN uptakes it, Methylene Blue uptakes it, and then
CoQ10, that's another one.
CoQ10 uptakes it. And then there's a few other ones that uptake it. So you can just plug in at different pathways because it has multiple different bottlenecks.
Yep. So Methylene Blue, I believe, hits the third or fourth pathway.
Yep.
If you want to go down the science rabbit hole. But the moral of the story is the effect you feel and get is more ATP, which converts to more cellular energy, which means you feel better, have more energy, just generally overall wellness.
Yes. And by that aspect, it helps uptake what's called the NRF2 pathway. Fancy words, but that's our primary anti-aging detox pathway. So we just make that pathway work more effectively.
Okay, so you get a little detox benefit from it as well.
Well, anti-aging is all about just like making your cells healthier and removing toxins. That's all anti-aging really is at its core.
Yeah, I like that. So that's the three main benefits. You have the ATP, you have the serotonin, and you have the antipathogenic.
Yep.
So those are three main benefits. Let's talk about administration routes.
Mm-hmm.
We've got basically IV, oral, and biohacker's favorite, suppository.
Unnecessary, but yes.
It is unnecessary.
Yep.
So basically, we do a lot of in-clinic IV, but we also, have our patients do a lot of oral.
Yep.
Yeah. So what's kind of the benefits of each, and why would you do it?
So oral exists from pennies per dose to dollars per dose. Quality denotes everything with Methylene Blue because very cheap Methylene Blue has a lot of toxins in it. Like fish tank grade Methylene Blue that you can use to clean up your fish tank from parasites. If you take that, you're consuming a ton of mercury and lead. Don't do that. So you want USP grade. And I don't recommend Amazon level USP grade because no one's actually checking these companies.
Yeah, those are still almost like industrial supply companies.
Yep. They're just like USP grade. So oral can cover most of the things we talked about, but it's from research, it says that oral doesn't get to a high enough quantity to truly penetrate the brain. So if you're going to use Methylene Blue to help treat symptoms from strokes, cognitive decline, and really even truly tried as an antidepressant, it's just not quite strong enough orally to fully make the effects happen.
Yeah, so I can speak to the difference. Like orally, I will feel a slight uptick in energy. Mm-hmm. Actually, a fairly substantial uptick in energy.
Well, it's interesting to say that because it comes down to which product you're using.
Yeah. So I'll feel a substantial uptick in energy and then slight focus increase. Slight. But when I do IV, I feel like I'm zeroed in.
Yep.
So that's the concentration in the brain.
So I will give a shout out to the company that we carry here, Quantum Collective, because I've tried a bunch of Methylene Blues and so have you. And in my opinion, and I don't know about your opinion, but in my opinion, this Quantum Collective stuff far outweighs literally everything else I've ever tried.
The uptake speed of it is actually impressive. Yep. So you can feel it within minutes. And
so I've talked to the owner and the inventor of this stuff. And he says basically Methylene Blue is all about how small and pure you can make it. And he's like, we have a proprietary new way where we call it a microcrystalline structure. So it's just even smaller and more pure. So it's just rapidly absorbed.
Yeah. I mean, I literally felt it was 5 to 7 minutes from taking it. Mm-hmm. So, but you don't want to, like you said, because of the oral, you get it in the gastrointestinal system. Yep. You don't want to be taking massive doses of this for long periods of time.
Yep.
Orally.
Correct.
So if you want to get the brain benefits, you should come in and do IV instead of trying to massively dose orally.
Yep. So typically what I tell patients is if you're really trying to maintain it without doing IVs all the time, I like 4 IVs close together, and then you go on orals to try and maintain that high level.
Very nice. Okay. So that's IV versus oral.
Yep.
Should we do dosage real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. So dosage ranges from orally anywhere from 2-3 milligrams.
I mean, you can start at half milligrams.
Still,
So you just, lick the tablet.
Yeah, you can start almost nothing
Yep.
up to, I do 180 milligram bar, which I do not recommend people do.
Yep.
But if you were going to do anything more than 3 to 5 milligrams, it has to be cycled.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think there's an argument where you could do 3 milligrams straight through because it's probably low enough dose.
Yep.
But anything more than probably about 3, you should cycle it. And you can do either weekdays on, weekends off, or 10 days on and 3 days off.
And why do we cycle?
Because the serotonin effects.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to become dependent on the serotonin
Yep.
that is created from this chemical.
Yep.
So, like I've noticed, I've played around with some higher dosages, and when I go off those 3 days off, you hit it like a low, almost like an acute onset depression, which is again why you want to monitor this and cycle it regularly.
Yep. And I've had multiple patients tell me that. Yeah, they are very aware on their off days. I'm like, that's why you need your off days.
Yes. So, and you don't want it. I guess it's not necessarily addictive, but
There's
could
no
be.
physical dependency to it, but it's kind of like they say weed has no physical dependency to it, but there's people that are addicted to it.
Psychologically.
Yep, same idea.
Okay. So that's oral dosage.
Mm-hmm.
IV dosage is much different because if I took what I take in a bar orally on an IV,
Tried that once.
I would be puking in a trash can because that's what happened.
So yeah, and the reason for that, when you take something orally, your stomach acid destroys a big part of it, whereas when you do the IV, there's no stomach acid destroying it. You're getting every milligram of it. So talk to your practitioner about their dosing recommendations, because I've heard people dose from as little as like 10 milligrams IV all the way up to 4 milligrams per kilo. And so talk to your practitioner about what's right for you. Call us if you want to see us, and we can dose it for you.
Okay. Very cool. Is there anything else we've left out on Methylene Blue?
Last thing, it's one thing I really like to combine it with is ozone therapies, because the last thing we didn't mention, Methylene Blue, what it's used for in traditional medicine is when you have carbon monoxide poisoning, it makes your cells like oxygen better. So we can use that same effect that when you do an ozone treatment and then do Methylene Blue right after it, it makes your cells more able to accept the ozone and oxygen that's coming in through the IV. So it just boosts the ozone treatment.
So you do ozone, then Methylene Blue, and then you get in the hyperbaric chamber. Ultimate oxygen stack.
It might float away.
Just pure oxygen.
Yep.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. K, and thank you guys for joining us on our episode of Methylene Blue, Stripped Down Edition.
Yep.
This is the Peak Performance Podcast. Signing off.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peak Performance Podcast, your #1 resource for today's top health hacks and facts. You can follow us on Instagram at the Peak Performance Pod or on X at PerformPod. You can also check out our website and weekly blogs at peakperformancepodcast.online. Again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. We put out a new podcast every Thursday. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the product. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Coach Kyle, Dr. K, and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of the information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein.